Hello, I'm Justin, and welcome to It's All Happening In. A little while ago, I sat down with George Stubbs and Jim Wilson, two men with impressive backgrounds who currently serve as co-chairs of Zero Waste Melrose, formerly called the Melrose Recycling Committee, which was actually still what it was called at the time we filmed this interview. We just jump right into the conversation, so please enjoy.
Thank you for being here. What would be the first step that I would take if I wanted to participate in the recycling that's available here in Melrose?
Well, I think if you're not bringing them with you, you go out to your local home goods or hardware store and you get yourself a couple of trash bins. Go down to the DPW yard and pick up stickers for the one you want for recycling. You might want one for recycling, one for yard waste, and one for your regular trash, which doesn't need a sticker.
Some people have troubles with their recycling bins and their trash bins getting broken. So go to Home Depot or Lowe's, get something that's not real expensive and moderate in size, and something that's going to stand up to some being thrown around. And as George said, get a label for the recycling and trash and yard waste, and that's all you need to do.
Go to the DPW site to the trash and recycling page and get yourself a schedule when you need to put your trash and recycling out there. It comes on the same day.
Okay, we'll be sure to put the link down below there. So I'm assuming, does the recycling pick up at the same day that trash pickup is for all people in Melrose?
Yes.
It is, okay.
Maybe not at the same time of day, but because the recycling truck is different from the trash truck, but they do it the same day.
But it is the same day. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, and we once had bi-weekly here in Melrose, although even then it would still be the same day for your recycling. But we went to weekly and single stream 3-4 years ago now, maybe. It's very popular.
I have some items in a box here. Sure. Now, I haven't shown you any of these items beforehand, right? Okay. I will start with the most basic. A can. Can it be put into the recycling bin every week here?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's the oldest recycling element of the recycling industry in the country, scrap metal and cans. It goes back to when we were industrializing in the late 1800s. No problem.
To what extent here does it need to be washed out? What is the impact if it is not clean?
JRM is asking us to rinse out all of the materials that we put into for recycling. And that just really means trying to get rid of the bulk of everything that's in there. So you don't need to put it in the dishwasher per se and get rid of every last item. But if you've got a jar or a can with a substantial amount of what was originally in the can still in it, you need to rinse it out. You need to get that out there, but you don't need to scrub the can clean.
Okay, very good. Aerosol can. Would this be okay to put in a recycling bin?
No, it wouldn't. It's complex, and so that is a material that has both plastic, it has metal, and it has various components still in it. And the nozzle and the gas being still under pressure, it's not something the JRM can handle. Now, if it's something that is a spray and it's an insecticide or it's something that's toxic, that has to be disposed of as hazardous waste at special events. But if it's something like what you have there, which is just end dust, that can be put into your trash, but not in the recycle.
It's important to note that a contaminated load of recyclable, quote unquote, materials is going to be all sent off to the incinerator. And that's cost to Melrose, that's cost to you and me, who are household, when we're, homeowners, we get charged for trash services, and some of that is fixed costs, and some of that is the number of trips that go up to the Haverhill waste to energy plant where our trash is incinerated. So we're trying to keep those costs down, and the cleaner we can keep the recycling bins on the curb and down at the yard, the better we can do at trying to reduce those costs.
Coat hangers. Now, when I get my dry cleaning done, I usually return the coat hangers. But what would I do in this event? What is the proper
That
way to
is
dispose?
the best way to recycle, because
Okay.
it does not go into your single stream. That is what JRM calls a tangler. JRM has a complicated, very expensive building of conveyor belts that separate all of the single stream into separate components. And things like that wire hanger and hoses and other things like that, mess up the conveyor belts. And so it does, though it's metal, it does not go in your recycling. It goes into the trash, or better, if you'll take it back to the dry cleaners or people that recycle it, you can have it recycled there.
All right, here's one. A plastic bag. Plastic is bad for the environment. It takes a long time to break down. Of course, we want to put plastic bags in our recycling. Is that true?
No.
No. Okay.
Unfortunately. I mean, we want to. Yes, it's true that we want to, but it's not true that it's a good thing to do.
Sure.
For the same reason that the tanglers should be left out, those things can gum up the works at the recycler as well. We've gone and taken a tour of the green works, and you can see with all this sophisticated machinery, there's still like 4 guys on that first conveyor belt just grabbing these things out of there, and they might not get it all.
Sure.
And so the machine gets has to shut down. It's not a safe job to go pull those things out either. Sure. It's hazardous.
Justin, there's actually another side to that as well. That's a type 4 plastic. Mm-hmm. And there are not many industries that can recycle and reuse that type of plastic. So
I'm sorry, did you say it's a
type 4? The number is type 4.
Type 4.
It's a low density polyethylene plastic. Mm-hmm. And as such, it's not easily recycled. So not only does JRM have difficulty in getting them through their conveyor system, they don't have anybody that will buy them and recycle them.
Dare I ask the different types of plastic?
There are
type.
hundreds, if not thousands, of types of plastics. But what you have to do is you have to look on the product to see what the number is. The plastics industry decided to try to make it easier for people to identify what their products were by giving them a general classification category. So that is a class category of 4, but even within plastic bags, manufacturers of plastic bags vary their products chemically and also in terms of thickness.
Sure.
So it can get complex. But in essence, the plastic industry decided to give their 7 numbers associated with different types of plastics. And what they did is they put little arrows around them that look like the recycling arrows. And theoretically, those plastics can be recycled. But that does not mean that the cities in the United States have a market and where they can send them for recycling. And in Melrose case, we only have a market for JRM only has a market for types 1 and 2 plastics.
Okay.
And that's why we're changing and letting residents know that only types 1 and 2 plastics should go into the single stream recycling.
Okay, terrific. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit later about other methods of carrying groceries and what you should do. If you do happen to be outside of Melrose and you get something in a plastic bag, just throw it away here as opposed to putting into the...
You can return those to Shaw's and to Whole Foods. They have barrels, bins out front where you can return those and a lot of other types of plastic that you're likely to encounter in your home. Like if you buy a whole big thing of toilet paper, it comes in a plastic wrap, and the plastics film recycling people, there is an organization with something like that name, and you can find out from them what kinds of plastics can be returned, plastic films. So as I say, that kind of bag, the kind of film around toilet paper. Now your next question would probably be, okay, where does it go from there? And that's a decision by Shaw's and Whole Foods on whatever market they can find for them. I don't know the answer to that. It's possible that it is getting incinerated, and it probably should be looked into. But
sure,
at the present time, you're going to have plastics like that in your life, regardless of what laws may be passed, and you can do that with a lot of the plastic film, is return them.
This one is a little bit tricky. It is a bag with some plastic inside, and I think you might be able to. It seems like it's glued. I think this would be a candidate for trash, right?
That's correct.
Okay. another thing that could potentially tangle the system.
Well, it's again a combination of materials here that's hard to separate, and
Sure.
so economically not worth going to the trouble to separate it out. Now, if you do have, it's Christmas time and you did get a package and there's straight bubble wrap there, pop the balloons and take that back to. That's a film that can go back to the Whole Foods or Shaw's.
Okay. Terrific. Okay, so
But those combinations of materials are just, as I say, vexing.
I've given you some really hard ones, not the traditional things that you might think would be recycled, but an old sneaker. What do I do with this? Do I throw it in the trash? Donate it? What do I...
We're trying to encourage people to use some of the recycle bins for textiles throughout the city. There are textile bins that take shoes, and if they're in good quality, they will give them to people that can be reused. And if they're not, they can recycle the materials that are in the shoes. So shoes, all types, leather, sneakers can be recycled. They can be put into the recycle bins for textiles. There's bins of this sort at our elementary schools and some other locations, including the DPW yard.
A empty beer bottle. This, certainly, right? Recycled.
That
It's
can go
glass.
in your bin. Yep.
Goes right in the bin.
No question about it.
Absolutely great. So why is it still only a 5-cent deposit? I feel like it's been a 5-cent deposit on cans and glass for since probably the 80s.
Justin, those prices are set state to state, and they vary. And sometimes different states get into situations where they charge more and people bring them across the state,
Sure.
so they label them for it. It's really up to the legislature and the people that have set a price, trying to incentivize people to bring them back, but also not try to put an undue burden on residents for returning the bottle. So it's probably an issue that's dealt with up in the State House, but I imagine it's just not that big of an issue, and for consistency, they've just left it the same.
Okay. Old batteries. What do we do here?
What kind is that? Is that an alkaline?
It looks like a Duracell alkaline, I would assume, battery.
In the trash.
In the trash.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if you have a nickel cadmium or something with those kinds of hazardous materials, you can bring them down to the yard.
The yard. What is the yard?
DPW yard on Tremont Street again.
Okay. Terrific.
So nickel, cadmium, and lithium batteries. Those do not go into your trash. They do not go into the recycle, but you do need to bring them down to the yard. And other places like Best Buy will recycle those as well.
I enjoyed that. That was a fun challenge, but certainly you guys have simplified this. You've put together a flyer that really helps clarify what can go into the recycling bins, what should and what should not. We're going to put this up on the video so you'll be able to see that.
We really just distilled it down to, if in your single stream recycling, you put glass, metal, cardboard, paper, and plastics types 1 and 2 into your recycling stream, you'll be totally compliant, and that will be great. Remember to rinse them and clean them as best you can. You don't have to go overboard. Then the things that we don't want, but some of them can be recycled. Most things can be recycled either at special events at DPW on Saturdays or through stores, like we were talking about, taking plastic bags to Shaw's and people where some of those come from. That you do not want to put things like electronics. You don't want to put batteries of any sort, electronics. You don't want to put any kind of tanglers, hoses, as we talked about, wire hangers, and you don't want to put textiles. And there are other items, and what we've done is try to make it very clear on this flyer what you cannot put into your single stream recycling and what you can. Both trash and recycled material are picked up by the city's contract hauler, JRM. And JRM takes all of the recyclable materials up to their facility they call the Greenworks on Route 1.
Okay.
Up in Danvers.
Okay.
And from there, they sort the material, and they have buyers for the individual material. So they don't recycle the material. They separate the material from the single stream, and then they have buyers for those materials.
And the process of sorting is partial automated, partial manual effort.
It's primarily automated, but there are enough difficulties with the process where they have a fair number of people that are in there sorting out materials and pulling out things.
But certainly I'm interested in the Melrose Recycling Committee, and I would love to know, overall, what is the mission of the Melrose Recycling Committee?
To educate people about recycling and to promote it, to increase it. It's been around since the late 1980s or so. Back then, we would hold the Saturday events at the yard where you would bring down all your recycling, and volunteers, and sometimes volunteers from different groups in the towns, whether it's Girl Scouts or the Human Rights Commission or something, they would join the recycling committee and take the newspaper out of the trunk of your car, take the glass out of the trunk of your car and separate it into the brown, white, and green. Those were the good old days.
Sure.
Curbside started in the mid-90s or so. And again, it was the recycling committee, an all-volunteer group, which works closely with the DPW, that got that going. And we've been working ever since to, keep promoting it, keep educating people about how to do it and so forth.
So how many members are there in the recycling committee today, approximately?
It's between 20 and 25.
20
it's
and
a
25.
volunteer organization. It changes, but our active membership is somewhere between 20 and 25.
That's terrific. And so what was your kind of driver to get involved so early on there?
I believed in environmental causes, and that was something that could be done locally. The people who started up and drove it were other people, Gail Wagner and Linda Ben-Ezra. Linda herself was a former alderperson and really a major leader in this town, and involved with the League of Women Voters, which is another organization that deserves a pitch here because they've been so instrumental in starting up a lot of organizations in this town, including the Human Rights Commission, but they were instrumental in the recycling committee. But I believed in environmental causes, and here was something that I could do locally. Back in the days when saving the rainforest was a thing that we'd like to do, but it's hard to do it from your home.
You're a committee, the DPW is a department within the government of Melrose. How does that work exactly?
For most of the time, we've had a recycling and solid waste coordinator that was a city employee who actually led our committee. And right now, there is no solid waste and recycling coordinator, though they are in the process of rehiring this person. And that has led us to be very closely linked with the Department of Public Works. We are, as a volunteer organization, we're not really beholden to them, but we're really trying to work with our mission to support them. So we work very closely. In fact, we meet with representatives from DPW at the first Friday of every month. So we really coordinate our activities with theirs. And I think that we're really trying to work together to reduce overall waste and improve recycling in the city.
That's great.
So we really have the same mission.
It seems like there's a great deal of respect in both directions, and that you're often communicating with each other on, kind of asking each other for advice, whether it's the DPW asking you or you asking the DPW. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think there are a lot of education functions that I imagine they would like to do, but we can really spend the time to do it, reaching out to the public and telling them what's available, how to do it, and that sort of thing. But I do want to hand it to the DPW for really internalizing recycling as a municipal function.
We've had some conversations, and there's a lot of initiatives going on. Just to mention one of them up front here was the single-use plastic bag kind of issue, or the notion of trying to move away from single-use plastic bag. I know you've recently made some terrific achievements there.
We do our work in subcommittees, And one of our subcommittees was dealing with the plastic single-use bag issue. And that was being led by Gina McNeil. And Gina did a great job with her group in terms of devising a strategy to go to residents and businesses and Chamber of Commerce, as well as city officials in the city of Melrose, in order to get support for the elimination of using single-use plastic bags at grocery stores and other stores. And so I think that project was very successful because Gina and her group went out and educated people about the problem. They enlisted their support and got people's buy-in, such that when the Board of Aldermen ultimately passed a bill banning the plastic single-use bags, that it was pretty much a foregone conclusion because people had gotten behind the project and understood. So we are promoting people using cloth bags and taking their own reusable bag to the grocery store and not using a single-use paper bag or plastic bag.
Yeah, I think you have a kind of a towards zero waste program. I would love to learn a little bit more about that.
We would like to see Melrose reduce the overall tonnage and volume of materials that are put out for trash weekly. And that will reduce the cost to Melrose substantially because we pay by the ton for everything that's going picked up by JRM. And it will help the environment because we're not burning that and producing carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. So we are trying to promote ways that residents start reducing the amount of bulky items that they put on the curb. We wish people would find, because there are plenty of areas where they could have furniture picked up. And there are, as we talked earlier about textiles and clothing, there are places that people can have their clothing recycled. And what we want to do is to have residents not only recycle, but also find better ways to have a big bulk of the weight of material that they're currently putting on the curb be reused and sent to other people or other uses rather than incineration.
Sure.
And that the more that we can reduce the waste, we realize that there's a practicality. We can't get to zero, but we are trying and using the phrase that's becoming popular today of working towards zero waste as a goal that we would like to see Melrose continually try to reduce the amount of material that we are paying for incineration.
Tell me about composting. I think Melrose, you had mentioned Melrose does a great job in recycling in general. I think you mentioned 80% of people in Melrose are actually participating.
It's actually 83.
83% of people in Melrose are participating in recycling. Is there different types of composting that I need to be aware of?
Basically two. There's yard waste.
Okay.
If you're a homeowner and you're going to have leaves and grass, there's that, and the city can collect that, and they manage it at a leased property at the southeastern end of town, and in the spring they'll make the finished compost available for you to come and collect it and dress your beds. The different category of composting is food waste. You don't want to put that in your take that down to the yard where it's going to be open, and the simple answer to that is rats.
Okay.
Food will attract rats.
Sure.
But you can compost in your backyard. Our DPW sells composting bins, but you can do your own research and get one at Lowe's or Home Depot or someplace like that. Things with lids so that the animals can't get in them, and you can take those banana peels or the potato peels or other non-animal fat types of organic waste and put them in there. And there's an art to it. You need to educate yourself a little bit on turning it every now and then, keeping it a little wet. But if you do it right, you can, again, get some soil amendment.
Sure. How does, if I want to, let's say I'm planting something in my backyard and I want to obtain some of this compost, does it cost me money as a community member or living in the city of Melrose? Where do I go to actually get this compost from the city?
That yard on Tremont Street, the DPW yard.
Okay. We'll make sure to link the address below. All right. So that's a great, sir, is that common among many towns? Do they have that where they make compost available to?
It's fairly common.
And do you have to pay anything? You don't have to pay anything.
No, there is no cost to residents for the compost.
Not here, no.
Yeah, that's terrific. Are there bins? I thought maybe the DPW had bins, or
They just had their yearly sale. You go online to order in March or so, and in May, you can pick up the item at the yard, and then you're off and running.
You say the item. What is the item? Is it like
a composting bin? They come in several forms. Some are the ones that the city sells are, yay big, top loading, bottom unloading. You just throw your scraps in the top, and there's a door at the bottom where the finished compost is available, and then you go and distribute it in the yard. So it's a bin. It's essentially all you need. And you may want some kind of tool to turn it every now and then. You may want to put your hose to it to keep it somewhat moist, not drenched, but moist. So that helps the breakdown. And what you'll see when you go in there, if you open it up and you've put a reasonable pile of stuff, you're going to see worms and other little bugs. They're doing the job of breaking it down.
That's great. That's great. I can purchase these bins from the DPW, but I'm sure you can really purchase them anywhere, right? Home Depot or
you can
Lowe's
purchase them from Lowe's and Home Depot. The only caveat is that they don't carry all of these items in their stores in inventory.
Okay.
I was just at Lowe's and asked them about that, and they had no compost bins in inventory.
Interesting.
But you can go online and order them and have them ready for pickup at there. So the compost bins are typically not carried at these stores as readily achievable to buy items, but you can go online and you can order them, and there's a wide variety of compost bins. And there's also a lot of literature on both our website. The public library at Melrose has almost 50 books on composting. It's really not complicated, but it's easy to find information to help you be successful in composting.
Sure. Yeah, I know the Melrose Public Library has been very helpful in general with the recycling committee, but many, if not all, the committees here in Melrose. I know sometimes you use the space here in the Melrose Public Library to hold some of your meetings, and it makes sense that there's a lot of information there too. In general, let me just ask this though. I mean, if I throw a whole bunch of banana peels, food items here in this composting bin, how long do I have to wait before I actually use that as fertilizer for tomatoes?
It's about 3 to 6 months at best.
At best.
But it very much depends on not only the conditions that George talked about, but if say I took the top of a pineapple, that doesn't break down real quickly.
Okay.
But sometimes people chop up or break down some of the items, and they decompose quicker.
Sure.
But I've left things in there over a year if it takes longer. If you're just patient, it'll eventually break down.
So what is your stance on garbage disposals, right? Because as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about what I typically do with my waste, and unfortunately, cooking dinner, peeling cucumbers or whatever, right down into a garbage disposal. Now that's probably not the best thing for me to be doing.
It's not the best, Justin, but really it's not the worst. In other words, what happens to the material you put down in the garbage disposal is it eventually goes out to Deer Island, and they basically take all of that organic material and make it into compost. So it's a less efficient way. It's certainly more efficient to have you break down compost, but it's better to break down the material in your garbage disposal and send it down to Deer Island than it is to send it up to Haverhill and have it incinerated.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that Jim touched on earlier, and it's really a very important part of it. That food waste you're generating in your kitchen, or at least from end to end in our society, and I don't know, sometimes these figures are global, sometimes they're just U.S. That's about 30% of what we generate in terms of waste. That's a lot of food that's going to waste. It's a lot of weight in our trash, so there's a cost there. And so if we were to really go after, getting the curbside waste weight down, that would be an important one to do. We're not, as a recycling committee, we haven't jumped in all the way yet, but we like to, encourage people to
Sure.
get a composter and divert that kitchen waste.
Because
And if your house is like mine, you're cleaning that out of your garbage disposal every now and then, and that's a pain in the neck. So I'd much rather be composting, but that's just me.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you imagine if we could reduce the amount that Melrose is paying for by 30%? That would be a significant reduction in the amount of cost to all residents.
So 30% of the weight of all of the waste, and when I say waste, we're not including recyclable goods, recyclable materials.
No, just the waste, the trash.
Just the waste. 30% of all of the waste is from food waste. So we're talking
In that ballpark, 30, 35. I've seen different
Maybe even
estimates,
more.
but it's in that
in that range.
range. It's
Right.
significant.
Yeah. Okay. It almost seems like a no-brainer. But that's not the only initiative that you're working on. You also have curbside textile that's happening this fall. And
Yeah, essentially. That's
Okay.
not an initiative that we've done a lot to facilitate. We did
Okay.
get a guy come from the company, come to the town and address us, and finally put him in touch with DPW, and then they hammered out us an agreement whereby they will do weekly pickup of textiles.
so it's weekly pickup of
Yeah, same day you put the
clothing
garbage.
items.
It's textiles of all types. So it is
Okay.
clothing items. They're going to distribute pink bags.
Okay.
And they will come around on
they?
trash day. It's called Simple Recycling.
Okay.
And
It's the
they're
name of the
going to
company.
make their pink bags available to residents. And in addition to textiles of all sorts, they will also pick up small appliances and kitchen utensils like pots and pans.
Oh, really?
So
Wow. Okay.
they're going to, for no cost to the city, pick up these recyclable materials curbside starting in October, and it's not going to cost the city money. And in fact, there will be some small monies coming back to the city as a result of the monies that they raise by selling these products.
So, George, you've got involved in the Melrose Recycling Committee in the 80s, right? Mm-hmm. And that was, what, soon after, or, not too long after you moved here to Melrose, right?
Not too long. I think the decisive factor was having a child. That's when you really get engaged in a community.
Sure.
At least for us,
Yeah.
we moved here in '86 and working elsewhere. But when you have a kid, you start meeting people.
Your background, at least your undergraduate education as well as your master's, is in philosophy, right? Mm-hmm. And then professionally, you kind of went on and you were an editor for publications in the telecommunications, electronics field. You had publications in the environmental business area. You've wrote for the Environmental Business Journal, and you published for the Environmental Business International in San Diego, California. Did your background in philosophy help you as an editor?
It helped me think and express myself clearly. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of my writing skills were a direct outgrowth of having studied philosophy. And there was a professor I had in college who would just make us, ask a question, have us write 600 words, which isn't very much, but it would be, you turn one in and it was so marked with red about stupid assumptions and extraneous points. And, he really got us to boil it down to the point. And you do that 5 or 6 times with this guy until he says, okay, I can give you a B or whatever. But I really, it's like making maple syrup. That was a big part of learning how to write, was get it concise and clear and straightforward. And
Cutting out a lot of any fad or yeah. Well, it's interesting that we first met as a result of me reading one of the articles that you have published. In addition to just the content that was interesting, I said, "Oh, this really flows well." And
Thank you.
And it wasn't surprising to learn that you had been an editor for many years, and you retired in 2015.
Yeah.
How was that for you? Was it a hard transition to retire,
No.
or was it kind of seamless?
It was seamless.
Seamless.
I was ready to retire, and I don't know how anybody could ever claim that they're bored in this world. It's just there's just too many places to go and too many things to read and investigate and the unexamined life is not worth living.
Sure. And you've been doing a lot of traveling too, right?
Yeah.
I think you mentioned, and you just recently got back from a trip.
My wife and I went to the United Kingdom. I think the most exciting trip was the one I took in December to Antarctica.
Wow. What was the catalyst for that trip?
My former boss wanted to put together something for the emeritus people in the industry that was a little off the normal conference that he did. In the end, it was just me, him, and his 2 kids, but because people said, yeah, I would love to, but Antarctica this time of year, when it didn't shake out. So we went.
Would you recommend going to Antarctica for anybody else?
If you can have it, if you can stand the trip across the Drake Passage, then yes, absolutely.
And you have a son as well that's in his early 30s. Does he have the writing bug like you?
I don't know about a bug. I think he's good at it.
He's good at it.
He works for a consultancy, and I think he has to prepare some communications like documents and things. And
sure.
So he's
got
got some of those skills.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because I was thinking about your background. You've been involved in recycling for years, and you've been an editor. You're very knowledgeable in this area, and now Jim is coming from a slightly different angle. Jim, let me just ask you. You've been in the Melrose Recycling Committee since 2015, and you've worked before you retired for 26 years as a research scientist for Cabot Corporation.
Cabot Corporation, and before that, BASF.
BASF. So, not to ask you to summarize, your entire career here, and what were some of the things that you were working on just before retirement?
I worked in everything from methods development and test development to working with plants and plant problems, diagnosing problems with plants, and also managing central research analytical groups that analyze for the entire company.
Just out of curiosity, where did you grow up from? Where did you sound from?
I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh, okay, you grew up in that area. All right. And what brought you here? Was it the job that brought you here to Massachusetts?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's not an awful lot of opportunities for chemists in New Mexico.
Sure.
So I've kind of worked around the United States and ultimately ended up in Massachusetts.
So what was it like first moving to Massachusetts, and then what eventually drove you to move to Melrose in 1998?
I was living and working in New Jersey prior to that, and the company sold the division I was at, and I found a job with Cabot Corporation. It was a very nice move. It was nice moving to Massachusetts. I lived in Westford, and then I met my present wife, and we moved to Melrose, just looking for a nice place to live that split the distance between where she worked in Boston and I worked in Billerica, and Melrose was perfect.
You retired in 2008. Was your transition to retirement kind of similar to George's? It seemed George had a very smooth transition.
Mine was very smooth.
It's very smooth as well. I don't know where I'm hearing this thing about older men having a hard time retiring and not knowing what to do with themselves. I agree. There's so much to do. I could find myself occupying every moment, but it seems like both of you are examples of kind of smooth transition. Is that correct?
I think so.
Yeah, but you're also involved with many things here in retirement, not only in the Melrose recycling community, but you're also part of the waste reduction subcommittee, and I'm sure there are probably many other kind of activities and hobbies that you're part of. Is that?
That's right.
Yeah.
So I keep quite busy in retirement.
Are you doing a lot of traveling as well?
We do. We're off to the Canadian Rockies this coming week, and last year we went to Croatia, and we travel quite a bit. At least one good trip a year.
All of this, everything that we've been talking about, I guess you have both dedicated a lot of time to recycling. George, I remember reading your article defending recycling. You published, I think, probably maybe a year ago, was it? Or
No, more like within the earlier this year. It was a response to a lot of mainstream media articles that, in my view, were a little bit hysterical about the so-called end of recycling, or about how it's outlived its usefulness and things like that. I frankly thought they got it wrong.
recycling is not doomed. Is that correct?
That's my belief.
Right.
I believe You think so too?
I think you referenced someone on the news that they put on that said, "Oh, recycling is so bad, I'm not even participating in recycling anymore," which I would assume that you disagree with that vehemently, and as you indicated in the article.
There's a bug in my head lately about either or thinking, or all or nothing thinking, or that if it's not part of the solution, it's part of the problem. And I think recycling is suffering from that. It's not designed to address the hyper-consumption in society that needs attention at a different level. But it is a necessary part of the solution, and solutions to problems are rarely, if ever, silver bullets. You have to do a lot of things and put them all together in an intelligent, integrative way. It's complicated, but I think that's the way the world works. So it's not either or.
So we should still
rarely
recycle.
Either or. Oh, definitely gotta recycle. There's one takeaway: do it.
Continue to recycle.
Yeah.
There have been instances where China's pushing back on some of the recyclable goods that the United States had been sending over there to be processed in their
They
facilities.
established a system of stringent contamination standards. And anybody who's going to recycle what the trade calls secondary materials, basically recyclables, wants to keep that contamination out. I think a cynical point of view, maybe cynical, there may be some truth to it, is that China established these stringent standards to protect a market that they were building themselves. The Chinese are more affluent, they're generating their own stuff, they have the processing capacity to deal with secondary materials, so they may be protecting their own markets. But that said, we didn't build enough of that capacity here, and we should have innovated. And now it looks like there are people who are jumping in and seeing the opportunity. And then that was an A. I guess the B is that, yes, we are seeing that opportunity here, and more pulp and paper mills are adding lines to do recycled paper. There's a big glass facility opening up in New Jersey that could serve much of the Northeast, and America's doing what it's always told us that it was good at doing.
Sure.
Or it seems to be trying to in this case.
And that's what you're hearing as well, or that's what
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we got sort of an easy ride where China was taking just about everything that we were sending over there, and there are more stringent requirements and are really pushing back on us to get more critical and develop the infrastructure, as George said, to recycle materials and find better ways to reuse all these materials that currently we've been sending to China. So for current time right now, where people are saying recycling is doomed, we're going through a transition period, and we need to build, as George said, the infrastructure in the United States and in Europe and other countries to really handle responsibly all of the kinds of materials that we're currently have been sending to China, and find ways to reuse them. And a lot of that is going on. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's what's happening right now.
Waste management is a market, and it's subject to market forces. And commodity prices, these materials are materials, metals and so forth. There are prices attached to them, and sometimes demand is up and sometimes it's not, and sometimes that demand is a critical factor in that demand are these companies that can take the recycled goods, break them down, and put them back together in new products.
And you said there's some new facilities being built in, just a couple off the top of your head. One's built in New Jersey, and then there's another one you had mentioned.
Well, there are now more than a couple paper companies that have doing what they refer to as opening new lines, production lines to process things like corrugated cardboard and paper. And Waste Management, the biggest waste management company in the world, is developing. They're building a lot of new materials recycling facilities. Or MRFs is what they call them. That's what the Greenworks facility is up on Route 1. That's a MRF. It's not Waste Management's, but it's that type of facility. And
What,
waste
so
management,
what is a MRF? How do you?
materials recycling facility.
Oh, okay.
And they pronounce it MRF.
Okay.
Because materials recycling facility is a mouthful.
Sure.
But waste management is building a bunch of them.
Right. And so the MRF is, that's just step one, right? And what China was doing was the step two with the materials. Is that?
China had capacity to actually take the materials and make something with them. Yeah, I guess you could look at it that way.
Okay. Are there a lot of benefits from just not having to deal with the overhead of shipping these materials overseas?
Well, Justin,
number
you're
crunch.
really talking about the cost of putting something and sending it by ship is and by weight and
These
in
barges,
terms of volume. It is absolutely a cost, but it's not as costly as building the plants and developing the technology to process the materials that we currently don't have in the United States. And there is actually a limit to how well these materials were being processed in China. A lot of the plastics were ending up in some of the major rivers and end up contributing to the plastic that's ended up in our oceans. So we're kind of faced in the world really of needing to develop technology to better handle a lot of the different materials and find ways to produce products by reusing these products. And that's a big demand right now, and people are taking a look at this, and corporations and countries around the world are trying to find better ways to process material. In the meantime, we're finding ourselves with more limited markets for some of the materials that we have been recycling in the past.
So we are going through a transition.
Correct.
But the future is not bleak as a result of going through this transition and the changing market forces. Other opportunities come about, and one of those opportunities may be creating an infrastructure here in the United States that may be able to better process. So George, you had mentioned the thought or the concern, and Jim as well here, about plastics going into the ocean, and I've heard of this term called microplastics, and I don't know if it had a specific definition, but I guess take that to mean that there's really smaller bits of plastic, and I guess they pose really a larger concern in the short term. Is that true, or?
It is, but what really is occurring is that plastics that are dumped into the ocean are worn down, or they're even broken down by animals, fish, eating them. And they're broken down into very small particles, everywhere from microns up to a millimeter in size. And these smaller particles then can be ingested by fish and other aqueous animals. And these smaller byproducts of breaking down the plastics can get consumed by humans as well. So even in our own aqueous systems or in our water supplies, if there are plastics that are broken down into these small particles as the plastics slowly degrade, then those smaller plastics can get absorbed when we drink water or when you eat a fish that has some of these microparticles. And those microparticles can cause all kinds of problems. They are not something that you want to be consuming.
Sure. And so I think what I heard, though, is that they break down into these microparticles or very small pieces by being in the ocean, or do they sometimes come first into the ocean in small pieces like that?
Well, primarily things are getting dumped into the ocean as large plastic particles,
Sure.
or large plastic materials. The bulk of the material that's in the ocean comes from 10 rivers, primarily in Asia and Africa. So a lot of these materials, and a lot of the material is coming even from China. So even a lot of the plastics that we were sending over there is ending up in some of their rivers and then going back into the ocean. Those larger plastic materials are breaking down into these microparticles.
So are they breaking down from what, the salt water, or is it what exactly is breaking down?
He's the chemist, but nature.
It's a combination of things. It's weathering, it's mechanical wearing and breaking them down. It's sometimes fish are chewing at certain particles of plastic that they see in the ocean, and then they get broken down into smaller pieces. So it's a combination of effects. where any kind of material that's subject to that kind of mechanical weathering, sunlight, other kinds of mechanisms will break down into smaller pieces.
Sure. Yeah, so but it's not like someone's taking a wood chipper and throwing a bunch of plastic in there and then dumping it into the ocean.
Well, there's something called
yeah.
microbeads, which are sort of the basic building blocks of a lot of plastic products. They're very tiny,
Right.
and they're sometimes finding their way in the environment. So sometimes these very small pieces of plastic are being discharged
Sure.
one way or another. The front end the problem on the production side is that these are petroleum products.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just more use of a fossil fuel that we should be using less of.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we have been producing, in the last 50 years, tremendous volumes of plastics. The United States is one of the largest manufacturers of plastic products. And there's huge benefits based on the weight and the durability. But until more recent times, nobody has really looked at the downside and the environmental costs and the human costs of this durable product, plastics. And so we're faced now with having to relook at what we're doing with this product, these plastics, and how we're using them, and how we can do a better job and not destroy the environment and hurt people's health with them. And it's a real awakening right now of people to the problems that have been produced, particularly heightened by the amount of plastics that we're seeing in the ocean. And people now are becoming aware of the need to do something about that.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, is it part of the driver for these containers that are all plastic, where they could be cardboard? I guess they're cheaper to produce for companies, and I guess they're less likely to puncture or get destroyed in transit. Is that what's driving these companies to use
Absolutely.
Plastic containers where they could be using paper?
They're lightweight, they're durable, they are resistant to chemical activity, so that if you put some kind of material into them, they're less likely to interact and cause the degradation of that product. So they're very attractive for a lot of reasons. Europe is actually pushing now to try to get manufacturers to settle on plastics that can be readily recycled and reused, and not to use plastics that are not readily recyclable. And
there are some plastics that are better than other plastics.
types 1 and 2. That's why we're pushing that, because those are readily recyclable and there is a market in the United States for types 1 and 2, but there are not markets readily set up to recycle the other types of plastics.
And what would push a manufacturer to use plastics type 1 and 2 versus the other plastics that they could be using?
Well, the European Union's technique is laws and directives that encourage producer responsibility. And they've done this in a number of areas, like hazardous chemicals and electronic products. They lay the onus of doing something responsible onto the manufacturer.
Yeah, but we don't do that here in the United States.
Well, in fact, just recently there was a conference in Switzerland, and 120 countries voted to put the onus on manufacturers for the recycling of these materials and for plastic materials. And one of the only countries that refused to sign that was the United States.
Wow, that's interesting. That's interesting. And so types 1 and 2 plastics are better for the environment, undoubtedly. And I didn't even ask this question. I'm just assuming that it actually cost more to produce than the other types of plastic.
No, that's not necessarily true. You have to remember that every type of plastics has some kind of properties for which it makes it attractive to use for the transport or in some kind of application.
So types 1 and 2 might have a different, it might be more susceptible to a temperature change, or they might be more or less durable. If types 1 and 2 are better, why wouldn't every manufacturer in the United States just use types 1 and 2?
Well, because of the application. For example, type 6 is styrofoam.
Okay.
And styrofoam is a great insulator.
I
And
see.
styrofoam is used to package electronics when you buy your TV and it comes packaged in styrofoam.
Sure.
Well, the type 1 material would not suffice in that kind of application.
Type 6 is styrofoam. Okay, so
So-
type 1 and 2, what is, is different type of plastic? What are the different types? Type 3, 4, and 5?
Well,
In general, not
well,
at a higher
type
level.
3 is polyvinyl chloride, and I
Okay.
think we're used to PVC piping that you use in
see.
your home.
I see.
And,
Okay.
and that kind of material, the kind of material that you think of when you look at a plastic bottle, well, that's not the kind of strength that you would need for plumbing, for PVC piping.
Right.
So different types of plastics have very, very different properties. But in particular, I think the single use, or where we're using some of these plastics for only a single use, that's what we're really trying to drum home, that we really need to make a change, because we're spending, we're buying all these different products just to carry home a small container of salad or something else, and then it's thrown into the trash.
Sure.
And there are better ways to do that.
If you were to put in your own words where the biggest opportunity here is for us in Melrose, and what your objectives here in the Melrose Recycling Committee, how would you characterize that?
From my standpoint, we're looking at the impact of what we set out curbside, the trash. The impact is based on the amount of weight that we put out at our curb. And if we can reduce that weight, we're talking on average of a year, it's over $1.2 million for Melrose alone. So if we could make 10% change, we're talking $100,000 plus. Not only are we reducing substantially the cost of incinerating that material, we're finding better reuse for that material, and we are not burning that material and increasing the amount of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide when we're burning that material up in Haverhill. So there's a real benefit, and there's a reason why, if we can move in Melrose to reducing the amount of waste that we're producing, we can have both a beneficial impact on the environment, and we can have a substantial impact at reducing the cost to Public Works for incinerating this material.
That's I mean, it's exciting. It's exciting to know of the opportunity, and from George's articles too, it's exciting to know recycling has a future, that none of the time spent towards this effort will be spent in vain, that it will all go to a positive, not only for the environment, but what makes sense for the environment also makes economic sense for the town of Melrose. Do you have anything to add? Or
I'm just to say that that's a very happy state of affairs when you can be a good global citizen and yet realize some benefits that are immediate and understandable, is exactly as Jim described it.
Well, your commitment, your donated time, your expertise here, I personally thank you for doing that. And I know many people here in the community appreciate your efforts as well. Certainly having this conversation makes me want to get even more involved with the recycling committee. I also want to recognize all of the other members, around approximately 25 other members of the Melrose Recycling Committee that dedicate their time and work very hard towards this effort with your leadership. It makes me feel a little bit more hope here and positive, knowing that you guys are running the show and taking charge of this effort. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.